The coffee tasted like rust and disappointment, but Jake Morrison drank it anyway. He sat in the corner booth of the station cafeteria, watching the morning shift change through the grimy window. Workers in orange jumpsuits shuffled past, heading to their posts in the mining docks. None of them looked at him. Nobody looked at failed salvage operators if they could help it. His partner, Corinne Bellamy, slid into the seat across from him. She looked tired. They both looked tired these days. Running a two-person salvage operation on the edge of human space did that to you. Got the notice, she said. She put a data pad on the table between them. Station administration. We have 30 days to pay our docking fees or they impound the Resolute. Jake picked up the pad. The numbers glowed red. How much do we have? 12 credits, maybe 13 if we skip meals this week. The docking fee is 8 credits. I know. Jake set the pad down. We pay the fee and hope we can find work before we starve. Corinne did not answer right away. She looked out the window at the salvage yard beyond the station. Thousands of broken ships floated in the darkness. Each one was a story of failure. Someone had built those ships, someone had flown them, someone had watched them die. There is an auction today, she said finally, down at the Krelthian yard. We do not have money for auctions. It is free to attend, and some lots might go cheap, real cheap. Jake knew what she was thinking. The Krelthian yard sold the real garbage, the stuff nobody else wanted, ships so damaged that even the parts dealers would not touch them. But sometimes, if you were desperate enough, you could find something useful in all that wreckage. All right, he said. Let us go look. The auction house was a converted cargo module bolted to the side of the station. The air inside smelled like oil and ozone. About 30 people sat in rows of cheap plastic chairs. Most of them were scrap dealers. Jake recognized a few faces from previous auctions. They all had the same look, hungry, calculating, always searching for an angle. The auctioneer was a Krelthian named Voss. His species looked like walking insects with too many arms. He stood at the front of the room behind a podium, his translator box hanging around what might have been a neck. Welcome, Voss said in broken universal. We have good salvage today. Very good. Many ships, many parts. Bidding starts now. The first lots went quickly. A damaged freighter drive core sold for 40 credits. A batch of hull plates went for 20. Jake watched the prices climb and felt his hope sink. Everything was too expensive. Corinne nudged him. Look at the catalog, lot 47. Jake pulled up the auction catalog on his data pad. Lot 47 was listed simply as Hegemony Cruiser, Sovereign Class, Severe Damage, No Power, Possible Contamination, sold as is. There was a single image, a massive ship maybe 200 meters long floating dead in space. The hull was black and scarred, whole sections looked like they had been melted. That thing, Jake whispered. Corinne, that is a wreck. Everything here is a wreck, but that is a big wreck. Big and dead, the listing says no power, that means the reactor is gone. Without a reactor, that ship is just 200 meters of worthless metal. Corinne tapped the screen. Look at the opening bid. Jake looked. The opening bid was 2 credits. 2 credits, Corinne said quietly, for a Hegemony cruiser. There is a reason it is so cheap. Nobody wants it. The towing fees alone would cost more than the ship is worth. Maybe. Corinne was still looking at the image. But what if the reactor is not dead? What if it is just in standby mode? Corinne. Hegemony ships have backup systems, redundant power. That was their whole design philosophy during the war. They built things to survive. And that ship did not survive. Look at it. Corinne turned to face him. Her eyes were sharp, determined. We have 12 credits. We need 8 for the docking fee. That leaves us 4 credits. If we bid 6 on that cruiser and nobody else bids, we win it and still have 6 credits left over. And if someone else does bid, then we stop. But Jake, look around this room. These people are dealers. They want quick profit, easy sales. That cruiser is neither of those things. I do not think anyone will bid on it. Jake studied the image again. The ship was huge. Even damaged, even powerless, it represented years of work, years of engineering. The Hegemony did not build cheap ships. They built them to last. If we are wrong, he said slowly, we lose everything. We are already losing everything. At least this way we have a chance. The auction continued. More lots came and went. Plasma cutters, sensor arrays, a batch of emergency rations from an old colony ship. Everything had a buyer. Everything had value if you knew where to look. Finally, Voss reached Lot 47. He clicked his mandibles in what might have been amusement. Lot 47, he announced. Hegemony armored cruiser, sovereign class, very damaged, no power confirmed, possible reactor contamination. Buyer pays all towing costs. Buyer pays all disposal fees. Opening bid is 2 credits. Silence filled the room. Someone coughed. Another person laughed quietly. Jake could feel the mood. Nobody wanted this lot. It was too big, too damaged, too risky. Voss waited. 2 credits. Anyone? More silence. Voss started to move on to the next lot. Jake raised his hand. 6 credits. Every head in the room turned to look at him. Voss blinked all 3 of his eyes. 6 credits, Voss repeated. We have a bid of 6 credits for lot 47. A man in the front row turned around. He wore the expensive clothes of a corporate buyer. His face showed pure contempt. Humans, he said loudly, always thinking they can fix the unfixable. A few people laughed. Jake felt his face get hot. Karen put a hand on his arm. Voss raised one of his many arms. 6 credits, going once. Jake held his breath. Please do not bid, please do not bid. Going twice. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Voss brought his arm down with a sharp gesture. Sold. Lot 47 to buyer 379 for 6 credits. Jake and Karen looked at each other. They had just spent half their money on a dead ship. Either they had made the best decision of their lives or the worst. The paperwork took an hour. Jake signed the transfer documents and watched 6 credits disappear from their account. The station systems registered them as the legal owners of one Hegemony armored cruiser, designation unknown, current status non-operational. They walked back to the Resolute in silence. Their ship was small, barely 30 meters long. A tugboat with living quarters and a basic repair shop. It had been home for 3 years now, 3 years of scraping by, 3 years of almost making it. Karen sealed the airlock behind them and pulled off her jacket. So, what now? Jake moved to the navigation console. Now we go look at our new ship. You do not sound excited. I am terrified. We just bet everything on a hunch. Karen sat down at the engineering station. Not a hunch, an educated guess. There is a difference. One sounds smarter. Despite everything, Jake smiled. That was Karen, always finding the humor even when things looked bad. It was one of the reasons they worked well together. The Resolute undocked and began the slow journey to the salvage yard, 3 hours at their best speed. Jake spent the time reading everything he could find about sovereign-class cruisers. The files were old. Most of the information came from the war. Human intelligence had studied these ships carefully, trying to find weaknesses. Trying to understand how the Hegemony built such effective warships. What he found was interesting. The Sovereign class was designed for long missions far from support. Each ship carried 3 separate reactor systems. The main reactor provided primary power. 2 backup reactors could take over if the main reactor failed. According to the specs, the backup reactors could run for years on minimal power. Karen, he called out, come look at this. She came over and read over his shoulder. 3 reactors, and the backups have automatic standby mode. If the ship loses main power, they shut down to minimum to preserve the core. They can stay like that indefinitely, so even if the main reactor is destroyed, the backups might still be intact, just waiting for someone to turn them back on. Karen gripped the back of his chair. Jake, if one of those backup reactors is working, we could actually get that ship operational again. Maybe, a big maybe, but possible, possible. The cruiser appeared on their sensors an hour later. At first it was just a blip. Then it grew larger, larger. Jake had seen plenty of wrecks before, but this was something different. This was a warship, a real warship, the kind that had fought in battles, the kind that had won battles, but now it was dead, silent, drifting. They brought the Resolute alongside. The cruiser filled their viewport. Armor plating that had once been smooth was now twisted and burned. Weapon ports gaped empty. Entire sections of the hull had been melted away. Running scans, Karen said. Her fingers moved across the console. Hull integrity at 47%. Life support offline. Main reactor showing 0 output. Jake felt his hope drain away. 0 output. Wait, Jake, look at section 7. He leaned forward. What am I looking at? Karen tapped the screen. That is one of the backup reactor compartments. The scan shows minimal power draw, very minimal, but it is there. Jake stared at the readings. She was right. Deep inside the ship, something was still alive, just barely, like a heart beating so slowly you could barely hear it. "Standby mode," Karen whispered. "The backup reactor is in standby mode." For the first time since the auction, Jake let himself believe. "We can work with this. We need to get aboard. We need to see how bad the damage really is." They spent the next hour docking. The cruiser had several airlocks, but most were damaged beyond use. They found one that was mostly intact and managed to create a seal with the Resolute. It was not perfect, but it would hold. Jake and Karen suited up, full environmental suits with their own air supply. They had no idea what conditions were like inside the cruiser. No power meant no life support. No life support meant no air, no heat, no light. Karen checked her suit seals one last time. "Ready?" "No, but let us go anyway." The airlock cycled. Jake felt his ears pop as the pressure equalized. Then the inner door opened. Darkness, complete and absolute. Jake activated his helmet lights. The beams cut through the black, revealing a corridor that seemed to go on forever. They stepped inside. Their magnetic boots clanged against the metal deck. Every sound echoed. The cruiser felt enormous, empty, like a tomb. "This way," Jake said. He had pulled up the ship's schematics on his wrist display. "Engineering is 3 decks down." They moved slowly through the corridors. The hegemony built their ships for their own species. The ceilings were low. The passages were wide. Jake and Karen had to stoop as they walked. The damage was everywhere: burned walls, collapsed bulkheads, debris floating in the zero gravity. Whatever had killed this ship had been violent. "Quick, Jake!" Karen's voice crackled through the suit radio. "I am getting atmospheric readings ahead." Jake checked his own sensors. She was right. Some sections still had atmosphere. Thin. Cold. "But that is impossible. The ship is dead." "Maybe not as dead as we thought." They continued deeper. The signs of life grew stronger. Emergency seals had activated in some corridors. Basic environmental systems were running on minimal power. The ship was not completely dead. Parts of it were still fighting to survive. Finally, they reached engineering. The compartment was massive. A huge open space filled with machinery. Conduits ran across the ceiling like arteries. Control panels lined the walls. And in the center of it all sat the backup reactor. A perfect sphere of metal 20 meters across. Status lights blinked slowly on its surface. Red, green, blue, a steady pattern that repeated every few seconds. "Beautiful," Karen whispered. Jake approached the main control console. The displays were dark, but when he touched them they flickered to life. Hegemony text scrolled across the screens. He could not read most of it, but the numbers he understood. Power output, temperature, containment field strength, all green, all stable. "The reactor is fine," he said. "It has been sitting here in standby mode for 6 months, just waiting." Karen moved to another console. "Jake, look at these power distribution logs." He came over. "What am I looking at?" "These are from before the ship went dark. Look at the output numbers from the backup reactor." Jake studied the data. Then he studied it again. The numbers did not make sense. According to the logs, the backup reactor had been putting out nearly 3 times its rated capacity. That cannot be right. The logs do not lie. Jake, the hegemony did something to this reactor. Some kind of upgrade, some kind of modification. Jake felt his pulse quicken. If these numbers are accurate, this reactor is more efficient than anything humans have. More efficient than anything anyone has. This is new technology. Recent. The dates show the modifications were made just before the battle that destroyed the ship. They stood in silence. The implications were huge. They had not just bought a damaged ship, they had bought a technological breakthrough. "We need to keep this quiet," Jake said. "Nobody can know what we found here." "Agreed, but Jake, we need help. We cannot restore this ship by ourselves. It is too big, too complex." "We do not restore it, not yet. First we just get the reactor fully operational. Then we assess. Then we plan." Over the next few days, Jake and Karen practically lived aboard the cruiser. They brought over tools and equipment from the Resolute. They studied the reactor systems. They learned how the hegemony had built this incredible machine. The work was slow, careful. One mistake could destroy the reactor and kill them both. But piece by piece, they began to understand. The key was in the containment field. The hegemony engineers had found a way to stabilize the plasma at higher densities. They used a nested harmonic pattern that human reactors had never attempted. It was brilliant, elegant, and it worked. On the fifth day, Jake felt confident enough to try bringing the reactor out of standby mode. Karen stood at the safety station, ready to trigger emergency shutdown if anything went wrong. "Ready?" Jake asked. "Do it." Jake entered the command sequence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the reactor began to hum, a deep sound that resonated through the deck. The status lights changed from red to green. Power output began to climb. Across the engineering bay, systems began to wake up. Lights flickered on, displays activated. Air vents started pushing atmosphere. "We have power," Karen said. Her voice was filled with wonder. "Jake, we actually have power." Jake watched the numbers climb. The reactor was performing exactly as the logs had predicted, better than predicted. The output was incredible. "Stable," he reported. "All readings are in the green, temperature nominal, containment field solid." They had done it. They had brought a dead ship back to life. But their celebration was short-lived. 3 hours after they brought the reactor online, the Resolute received a transmission from Station Meridian Security. "Salvage Vessel 379, this is Station Security. We are detecting active power generation from your location. Please explain." Jake and Karen looked at each other. They had been so focused on the reactor that they had not considered that anyone might notice. Jake opened a channel. "This is Morrison. We have successfully reactivated a backup reactor for power during our remediation work. Everything is within safety parameters." There was a pause. "Understood. Station administration is requesting a status update on Lot 47. You have been out here for almost a week. Remediation is taking longer than expected." The contamination was more extensive than the initial surveys showed. "You are aware that salvage rights expire if work is not completed within 60 standard days." "We are aware." "Very well, security out." Karen closed the channel. "We have 53 days left. 53 days to get this ship operational, or at least operational enough to prove we own something valuable. Can we do it?" Jake looked around the engineering bay, at the active reactor, at the systems coming back online, at the impossible task ahead of them. "We have to." The reactor hummed like a living thing. Jake Morrison stood in the engineering bay at 3 in the morning, watching the power levels hold steady. 36 hours since they had brought it online. 36 hours of perfect stability. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt the weight of everything they still had to do. Karen found him there. She carried 2 cups of instant coffee from the Resolute. The liquid was brown and probably tasted terrible, but it was hot. "You need to sleep," she said. "I will sleep when we figure out propulsion." Karen handed him a cup. "Jake, we have power, that is huge, but making this ship move is a different problem. The main drive is destroyed. The coupling systems are melted. Even with unlimited power, we cannot just will the ship to fly." "I know." Jake took a sip of the coffee. It tasted worse than expected. "But we have 52 days left. If we cannot prove this ship can move under its own power, the station will classify it as debris. They will take our salvage rights and sell it to someone who can afford to tow it." "So what do we do?" Jake pulled up a schematic on his data pad. "The main drive is gone, but look at the maneuvering thrusters. There are 12 of them positioned around the hull. They are designed for fine control, not propulsion. But if we can get even a few working, we might be able to move the ship." "Might. Better than nothing." They spent the next week working on the thrusters. The systems were complex. Hegemony engineering was sophisticated, built with materials humans rarely used. But it was also modular. Parts could be swapped. Systems could be rerouted. Jake discovered that 6 of the 12 thrusters were completely destroyed. 3 more were damaged beyond repair. That left 3 potentially functional thrusters. Not enough for proper maneuvering, but maybe enough to prove the ship could move. The problem was power distribution. The reactor could provide energy, but the conduits that carried that energy to the thrusters were damaged. In some places, they were completely missing. "We need to reroute through the backup distribution network," Jake said one evening. They were eating rations in what had been the crew quarters. The compartment now had heat and air, which made it almost comfortable. Karen looked up from her food. The backup network was not designed for thruster loads. "We would be running way over capacity. The reactor can handle it. The hegemony over-engineered everything. We just need to reinforce the weak points in the network." "With what?" We do not have the materials, we do not have the equipment. Jake set down his ration pack. Then we stripped them from the damaged sections. This ship is huge. Somewhere in all this wreckage is everything we need. We just have to find it. Finding it took another 10 days. They crawled through collapsed corridors. They cut apart bulkheads. They salvaged every piece of useful material they could find. Power conduits, coupling joints, control circuits. Everything went into a growing pile in the engineering bay. It was exhausting work, dangerous work. The damaged sections were unstable. Twice Jake nearly got caught when a weakened deck plate gave way. Once Karen had to pull him free when his suit caught on a piece of twisted metal, but they kept going. They had no choice. On day 28, with 32 days remaining, they began the actual reconstruction work. Jake designed a modified power distribution system that used parts from 6 different ship sections. It was not elegant. It was not even safe by normal standards, but it might work. Karen welded conduits while Jake programmed control systems. They worked in shifts, one sleeping while the other worked. Time became meaningless. There was only the work, the endless, exhausting work. And then on day 35, another transmission came from the station. Salvage Vessel 379, this is station administration. We are sending an inspector to evaluate your progress on Lot 47. Expect arrival in 3 days. Jake and Karen were in the engineering bay when the message came through. They stopped working and looked at each other. 3 days, Karen said. We are not ready. I know. Jake looked at the partially completed power distribution system. At the thrusters they had barely begun to test. At the mountain of work that still remained. What happens if the inspector decides we are not making adequate progress? Karen asked. They can revoke our salvage rights immediately. Safety concerns, environmental hazards, they have a dozen reasons they could use. So we need to show them something impressive. We need to show them the ship can move, even if it is just a little bit. We need to prove this is not just a dead hulk. They did not sleep for the next 72 hours. They worked without stopping. Coffee and stimulant pills kept them awake. Fear and desperation kept them focused. Jake finished the power distribution network first. It was rough, ugly. But when he ran the diagnostics, the system showed green. Power could flow from the reactor to the thrusters. Karen worked on the thruster control systems. The hegemony software was incompatible with human interfaces. She had to write translation programs. Bridge protocols. Make 2 completely different technologies talk to each other. On the morning of the 3rd day, 6 hours before the inspector was scheduled to arrive, they stood together at the helm controls. The station they had set up was crude, salvage displays, jury-rigged control panels, but it was functional. This is it, Jake said. His voice was hoarse from exhaustion. Either this works or we lose everything. Karen pulled up the thruster control interface. Reactor output is stable. Power distribution network shows green. Thruster systems are ready. Then let us see if this works. Jake activated the thrusters. For a moment nothing happened. Then the entire ship shuddered. A deep vibration that ran through every deck plate. Alarms began to sound. Power spike, Karen called out. Conduit 7 is overheating. Rerouting. Jake adjusted the power flow. The alarms quieted, the shaking stabilized. And then slowly, impossibly, the cruiser began to move. It was not fast. Barely a crawl, but through the viewport they could see the debris field around them shift. The ship was changing position. They were flying. It works, Karen whispered. Jake, it actually works. Jake let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. Keep monitoring the systems. We need to maintain this for at least 10 minutes. Prove we have real control. They flew the cruiser in a slow circle, testing the response time, learning how the damaged ship handled. It was sluggish, difficult, but it moved. That was all that mattered. When the inspector arrived 6 hours later, Jake and Karen were ready. They had cleaned up, changed into fresh clothes, made themselves look professional instead of like 2 people who had not slept in 3 days. The inspector was a woman named Commander Lisa Grant. She was career military, tall and stern with gray hair cut short. She came aboard the cruiser with 2 assistants and a clipboard full of regulations. Lieutenant Morrison, she said. Her voice was formal, cold. I am here to assess your salvage operation and determine if you are making adequate progress toward remediation. We are making excellent progress, Commander. If you will follow me, I can show you what we have accomplished. Jake led them through the ship. He showed them the restored life support, the functioning reactor, the reconstructed power systems. Grant took notes but said nothing. Her face revealed nothing. Finally, they reached the engineering bay. Grant walked around the reactor, studying the modifications Jake and Corinne had made. "This is impressive work," she said at last, "but a working reactor does not make this ship salvageable. You still have the propulsion problem. This vessel cannot move." "Actually, Commander, it can." Grant raised an eyebrow. "Explain. If you will come with me to the helm, I can demonstrate." They gathered at the helm station. Corinne stood ready at the engineering controls. Jake took his position at the helm. "Commander, with your permission, I would like to move the ship approximately 50 meters forward." Grant folded her arms. "This I have to see." "Permission granted." Jake engaged the thrusters. The ship shuddered. Then smoothly this time it began to move forward, 50 meters. He brought it to a stop. Then he moved it back to the original position. Grant was silent for a long moment. "How did you do this?" "We rebuilt the power distribution network using salvaged components from the damaged sections. The maneuvering thrusters are functional. We have basic propulsion capability." Basic is an understatement. This ship handles like it has been through a meat grinder. "It has been through worse than that, Commander, but it moves. That was your requirement, proof that this vessel is not just debris." Grant walked to the viewport. She looked out at the salvage yard, at the hundreds of other wrecks floating in the darkness. "Lieutenant Morrison, do you understand what you have here? A damaged hegemony cruiser that we legally own. You have a functional warship. Even in its current condition, this vessel represents significant military capability. There are going to be people who want it, important people, powerful people." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you saying the military will try to take it from us?" Grant turned to face him. "I am saying you need to be smart about this. You bought this ship legally. You have restored it within the salvage deadline. That gives you rights, but rights only matter if you can defend them. What do you suggest? Register this vessel immediately, get proper documentation, make your ownership a matter of public record before anyone can challenge it, and then decide what you want to do with it." "We want to keep it." Grant smiled. It was the first expression of warmth she had shown. "Good. Because in my professional opinion, you two are exactly the kind of stubborn that this situation requires. I will approve your salvage operation. You have my recommendation for full ownership rights." After Grant and her team left, Jake and Corinne sat in the crew quarters. They were too exhausted to celebrate, too overwhelmed by what they had accomplished. "We did it," Corinne said finally. "We survived the inspection. That is not the same as succeeding." "Jake, we made a dead ship move. We proved everyone wrong. That is succeeding." He knew she was right, but he also knew that Grant had been right. They now owned something valuable, something other people would want. The hard part was just beginning. Over the next several weeks, word spread about what they had done. A two-person salvage team had restored a hegemony cruiser. The story spread through the station, then to other stations, then across the sector. Offers started coming in. Corporate buyers wanted to purchase the ship. Scrap dealers wanted to buy individual systems. Even some military contractors expressed interest, but Jake and Corinne turned them all down. They had not come this far just to sell their achievement to the highest bidder. Then, 6 weeks after the inspection, they received a different kind of offer. This one came from the Colonial Defense Initiative, a government research organization. They wanted to study the reactor. The representative was a scientist named Dr. Helen Torres. She arrived at the cruiser with a team of engineers and a proposal. "We have reviewed the power output data from your reactor," Torres said. She was a small woman with intense eyes. "The efficiency numbers are extraordinary. If they are accurate, this represents a significant advancement over current human technology." Jake and Corinne had been expecting this. They had known eventually someone would notice the reactor performance. "They are accurate," Jake said. "The hegemony made modifications to the containment field. It allows for higher plasma density without instability." Torres leaned forward. "We want to understand how they did it. We want to replicate it. This technology could change everything: ship design, power generation, even weapon systems." "And what do we get in return?" Corinne asked. "We are prepared to make a substantial offer: purchase the reactor outright, or license the technology with royalty payments." You would be compensated very well. Jake looked at Karen. They had talked about this possibility, planned for it. We are not selling the reactor, Jake said, but we are willing to license the technology with conditions. What conditions? We retain ownership of this ship. We get a percentage of all future licensing revenues, and we want jobs as consultants. We know this technology better than anyone. If you want to replicate it, you need us. Tors considered this. That is acceptable. But I need to verify the technology first. My team needs access to the reactor. Full access, complete documentation. Agreed, but the reactor stays on our ship. Your team works here. The negotiations took 3 weeks. Lawyers got involved. Contracts were written and rewritten. But finally, they had a deal. The Colonial Defense Initiative would pay them 12 million credits up front for exclusive licensing rights. They would receive an additional 5% of all revenues from any technology derived from the reactor designs, and they were both hired as senior technical consultants at generous salaries. The day the first payment cleared their account, Jake and Karen sat in the crew quarters of their cruiser. The ship that had cost them 6 credits now had life support throughout. Clean corridors, functioning systems. It was still damaged, still scarred, but it was alive. 12 million credits, Karen said. She was staring at her data pad, at the balance that had appeared in their account. I keep checking to make sure it is real. It is real. We were broke. We had 12 credits, 12, and now we are not broke, Karen laughed. It was the sound of relief, of tension finally breaking. That is the understatement of the century. Jake stood and walked to the viewport. The salvage yard stretched out before them, all those dead ships, all those failed dreams. Do you remember what that corporate buyer said at the auction? About humans always thinking they can fix the unfixable. I remember. He was right. We do think we can fix the unfixable. That is what makes us human. Dr. Tors and her team moved in the following week. They brought equipment, instruments, a whole mobile laboratory that they set up in the cargo bay. They studied the reactor with the intensity of people who knew they were looking at something revolutionary. Jake and Karen worked with them, explaining the systems, showing them the modifications the hegemony had made. It felt strange at first having other people aboard their ship, but gradually it started to feel normal, natural. They were part of something bigger now, something important. 3 months after they had bought the cruiser, Commander Grant returned. She found Jake in the engineering bay, working with Tors on a particularly complex section of the containment field design. Lieutenant Morrison, Grant said, do you have a moment? Jake excused himself and followed Grant to a quiet corridor. I wanted to tell you in person, Grant said. The Navy has been watching your work here. What you have accomplished is remarkable. You took a ship that everyone had written off and turned it into something valuable. Thank you, Commander. We have other wrecks, other hegemony ships that were damaged in the war, ships we classified as total losses. But after seeing what you did here, we are reconsidering that assessment. Jake felt a spark of interest. You want us to look at them. We want to hire you, officially. You and Karen would head a new salvage assessment division. Your job would be to evaluate damaged hegemony vessels and determine which ones might be recoverable. The pay would be substantial, and you would have access to resources far beyond what you have now. What about this ship? It stays yours. In fact, we would lease dock space from you. Use this cruiser as your base of operations. You would keep making money from the reactor licensing and draw a government salary at the same time. Jake thought about it, about the possibilities, about all the other dead ships out there waiting for someone to see their potential. I need to talk to Karen. Of course, take your time, but Lieutenant, I hope you say yes. The Navy needs people who see possibilities where others see only problems. That evening, Jake and Karen walked through the ship together, their ship. They had cleaned up so much of the damage, repaired so many systems, but there was still work to do. There would always be work to do. What do you think? Jake asked. About Grant's offer, Karen was quiet for a while. I think we spent 3 years scraping by, taking whatever jobs we could find, never knowing if we would make enough to keep going. And now we have options. We could retire. Live off the licensing money, never work another day. But, Karen smiled. But that sounds boring, Jake. We proved something here. We proved that people like us, people without fancy degrees or corporate backing, we can accomplish incredible things. Why stop now? So you want to take the job. I want to find more ships like this one. I want to turn more scrap into something amazing. Do you not? Jake looked around the engineering bay, at the reactor humming steadily, at the systems they had brought back from death, at everything they had built. Yeah, he said, I do. They accepted Grant's offer the next morning. Within a week they were reviewing files on damaged hegemony vessels scattered across human space, destroyers, frigates, even a dreadnought that had been drifting in deep space for 2 years. Each file was marked with the same designation, total loss, not worth recovery, but Jake and Corinne knew better now. They knew that what looked like scrap to some people might be treasure to others. They knew that impossible was just another word for difficult. 6 months after buying the cruiser, they stood on the observation deck. Below them, the salvage yard stretched into darkness. But now they saw it differently, not as a graveyard, as a garden, full of seeds waiting to grow. Next week we leave for the dreadnought, Corinne said. Grant says it is in even worse shape than this cruiser was. Good. Good, Jake smiled. The worse the damage, the bigger the challenge, and we are very good at challenges, Corinne laughed. She put her hand on his shoulder. Partners, friends, 2 people who had bet everything on 6 credits and won. You know what the best part is, she asked. What? That corporate buyer at the auction, the one who laughed at us. He probably reads the news feeds. He probably sees stories about the famous salvage team who restored a hegemony cruiser, and he probably knows it was us. I hope he does. I hope he remembers what he said about humans always thinking they can fix the unfixable. Because we proved him right. They stood together in comfortable silence. Outside, stars glittered in the endless dark. Somewhere out there, a dreadnought waited. Another impossible challenge. Another chance to prove that scrap was just potential waiting to be realized. And they would do it. Because that was what humans did. They looked at broken things and saw possibilities. They took the discarded and made it valuable. They turned 6 credits into 12 million and were not done yet. Not even close to done. The cruiser hummed beneath their feet, their ship, their home, their proof that impossible was just a word people used before someone came along and did it anyway. Jake pulled up the file on the dreadnought. The damage assessment was brutal, multiple hull breaches, no power, severe structural damage. The Navy had abandoned it as beyond salvage. Perfect. Ready to do it again? He asked Corinne. She grinned. Always. And somewhere in the darkness, another dead ship waited for someone to see its potential. Someone stubborn enough, desperate enough, crazy enough to believe that scrap could become treasure. It was going to be a good year.